Welcome to the PID Pakistan Innovation Center webinar. It's a collaboration between the Pakistan Innovation Foundation, I should say, Pakistan Innovation Foundation, founded by Athar Osama, and PID, which is an old think tank. We are collaborating on a series of webinars to try and understand innovation. Many of us have now come to understand, after much research and debate, that the path to growth and welfare is innovation and entrepreneurship. Whereas in the past, we used to think that it was important to find funding and to find money and to build large projects. Now it seems that the path to growth and development and welfare of the people is innovation, entrepreneurship. And anybody studying entrepreneurship and innovation will have to or cannot miss what's happened in China over the last 20, 30 years. A phenomenal episode has taken place, which is the first in human history, where a developing country has made huge strides, growing at double-digit growth for about 30 years, and developed a whole new setup, not only for development, but also for innovation entrepreneurship. Now, China, if I'm not mistaken, and guests will confirm it, is competing with the US in terms of innovation and patents. And in many areas, like 5G, for example, China has got the US nervous. So it is an important system to learn from. And this is why Athar Osama recommended that we study the Chinese innovation entrepreneurship model. So I'm extremely, extremely grateful to Athar Osama for suggesting this webinar to us and developing this collaboration for us with Hong Kong, with China, and with other places. So we will try and study the Chinese innovation and entrepreneurship system and learn from it, see what we can learn from it for Pakistan. So let us, without further ado, I don't want to take up too much time, let us turn to our panel. Let me briefly introduce our panel, although you can see on this slide their introductions and their names and their affiliations. We've got Ms. Peggy Liu, chairperson of JUCCCE, the organization behind the greening of China, which is very interesting. China is now moving to greening the economy. We've also got Professor Bahar Sharif from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. We've got Mr. Athar Mansoor, a civil servant and a researcher on Chinese science and innovation at HK UST, which is, I think, a rare opportunity. So I hope Athar Mansoor will tell us some very interesting things. And then, of course, we've got Dr. Athar Osama, who, as I said, is quite a champion for innovation, former member of the Planning Commission, and founder of the Pakistan Innovation Foundation. So with that, let me ask Peggy Liu to tell us about the Chinese system. How is it that China has been able to develop innovation entrepreneurship in the last 30 years, while countries like us who have been trying for 70 years have not succeeded? So could you briefly, Peggy, tell us what your system is and how is it that, what are the lessons that we can learn from? So over to you, Peggy.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Osama, for inviting me, everybody on this panel in the think tank. It's such a pleasure to be able to have this forum, to have Pakistani and Chinese relations. This is such an amazing opportunity. I do invite all of you to continue to talk to me if you have any further questions after this. Of course, when I usually speak about China, it takes me at least 40 minutes to talk about the basic greening of China. And if I do this in 10 minutes, it's very difficult. So I'm going to just talk very top level. Of course, there's many, many, many different stories I can tell you. But first, I want to tell you that it is possible. I will give you 6 examples of changes that I've seen in China that I've been directly involved in. So one is, I think it's so important as human beings that you know that we have no boundaries, that we have infinite possibilities. So I'm going to start there. 2, I'm going to talk about some of the levels of innovation that a lot of people don't put together when they think about what is an intervention that can increase innovation locally. Okay, so those are the two things that I hope to accomplish, and then we can go from there. When I started joint US-China collaboration on clean energy in 2007, it was out of the first public dialogues between these two governments on clean energy. And what they said shocked me, which is that they had 60 MOUs between the two countries and nothing tangible to show for it. So clearly at this moment, the two countries wanted at that governmental level to collaborate, but they didn't really know how to bridge the gap. So I think most of the collaboration efforts fall because they don't understand each other's language at the bare minimum, the culture, and then what do they consider success. So for Chinese people at that moment, what they considered success was a picture of a building or some hardware infrastructure that a mayor could stand in front of and claim victory, right? But for the US, it was much more like IP and more complex outcomes. So they couldn't even understand what the success measures were to get started. And then the cultural barriers were just too great to get beyond. So for example, in Chinese culture, you should have dinner together 3 times and really get to know each other before you talk specific details. Whereas the US, people like to just go straight into, here's the transaction that I'm interested in, let's talk business. And so for Chinese, that's a little off-putting. So what my advantage was is that I was born and raised in the US to a first generation of Chinese that moved to the US. And we're now all in Shanghai. So it's still a very Chinese family, but I'm very steeped in American culture. So I went to MIT and Harvard and McKinsey in Los Angeles, Silicon Valley and internet, the first boom there. So I understand American business. So my advantage is I sat in the middle as a bridge. I think that this is important not just for geographical bridges, but it's also important for all of the different silos, all the different disciplines that are required to come together when you talk about holistic system transformation. Right, so we're not just talking about solar or wind or public utilities. We're really talking about a whole ecosystem, an urban ecosystem. And actually, it's not just hardware, it's also software and much more. So we were very, very successful since 2007 in transforming China. And I couldn't really explain why until honestly last year, why we were successful. But let me just walk you through. In 2007, we brought this new concept into China. Nobody had heard of this concept before. It's called smart grid. And this is essentially revolutionizes the entire electricity system. Now, today, China is the leader in smart grid. About 2.5 years after we started this, the state grid of China committed $7.2 billion to implement smart grid across the country by 2020. Of course, this has now blown up to about 500 smart cities, a much bigger investment. And again, China has completely reformed its electrical system. A lot more to go, but it's a completely different system. At the same time, we were asked by the government, one of the ministries, Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development, to teach the first classes to mayors across the country how to build cities sustainably. And so,
can I just ask you to explain what a smart grid is? Because I certainly don't know, most of us don't know. So can you please?
So I would say the easiest way to explain it is the old landlines, the rotary phones, basically you just had one-way communication, right? So this is the same with coal-fired power plants. You just have electricity just pushed through to the person that pours the tea, right? Whereas a smart grid is like internet, where every single node in the mesh, in the network, can talk to each other. And so if there's a break in the system, when I was young growing up, we would have like thunderstorms, and then electricity line would go down and the whole neighborhood wouldn't have electricity because it's only going one way. So it's serial, it's not parallel. So, I mean, electrical engineering type of speak. So smart grid allows you to bypass, reroute, because every single node is connected. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but one of the most important consequences for this is that you can take intermittent variable energy, variable levels of energy. So solar is high in day, wind is high at night, right? So whereas the old school source of energy is coal-fired power plant that just always gives you the same amount of energy. So this is the gateway to clean energy. The smart grid is much more complicated. I mean, I can speak for days about what is smart grid, but that's the basic. It revolutionizes every single part of electricity, generation and delivery. That's sort of the end all. So we were asked to teach the first eco-city classes to mayors across China. We did this for about 8 years, teaching 1,000 mayors and central government officials across China, small and large towns, rural towns to big cities, how to build eco-cities. Again, this is the first ever classes to this level government. And I brought in experts from around the world, where the mayors or deputy mayors, London to the sustainability head of New York City to Salt Lake City for light rail. And we covered every aspect of building a city, from low carbon transport, clean energy, to sustainable lifestyle, etc. So there's many layers to an urban city. So we created curriculum for the Chinese government, and now all of that is online as well. And of course, we started off as Clean Energy Conference. So in 2007, this kicked off the momentum towards adoption of clean energy. So if you look at when did China actually first start investing heavily in clean energy, it was 2007. So some of it was, I happened to be at the right place at the right time. Some of it was we were ready, China was ready and open, and the US was very interested in working with China. So there was just a lot of things that helped, China just catapult clean energy. So now you probably know that China is the largest generator and manufacturer of clean energy in terms of ecosystems. So those are three. And then in 2010, I started to look at infrastructure related things, because I realized that sustainability is a balance. It's a formula of supply and demand. And so I can't just keep working on supply, energy efficient supply. I have to also work on reducing demand. So I did a lot of research on how do you change behavior in the society. And this became a conversation around the country called China Dream. And when Xi Jinping came into office in 2012, October, he adopted that term, and now it's the national slogan. And so the idea was that the China Dream, it is embedded into the China Dream, is a green China, is an ecological civilization. You don't even have to talk about it. It just is. So that was the purpose of that. I believe in 2008 or 9, I started with GE and Philips Lighting and Citibank and PwC, L'Oreal, and many other corporate entities and celebrities. We ran a campaign to ask people to bring in their old incandescent light bulbs, and we would give them free up to 6 energy efficient light bulbs. And now China is the leader in energy efficient lighting, the leader in LED lighting anywhere in the world. I think it was 2010, I can't remember which year, I went to Davos, and I sat in with some people talking about climate finance. And I told them very clearly that the way to do this is through green bonds. And I told them how to do it. So I ended up partnering with somebody called Sean at Climate Bonds Initiative in London, Kinney. And he and I started talking about creating a white paper, just like we did for Smart Grid. What is Smart Grid? How does it benefit China? Here are the first steps. And then you create a conversation around it. You create momentum, and you get the actors in there that are the decision makers, the acupuncture points for change. And so the same thing happened with green bonds. And he really took this forward with many other people. And now China is, I think, one of the leaders in the world in green bonds. So the first one was issued by HSBC. I may have missed one, but there's 6 innovations that Juice and I were smack in the middle. We created that innovation, we created that change. And so now I can go back and explain to you very clearly how did we create this level of change? How is it that not only did we create the change, but it was such a tipping point in the society that China became the leader around the world in this particular area, right? So I'll tell you just very shortly what I think the formula is. And of course, I have many, many talks that go into this detail. So one is that change is the only constant in physics. Entropy is the only constant in physics. Right? So entropy is essentially expansion, right? Expanding universe. Expansion is creation, right? So all of our current governance systems that I see, especially in the West, are based on keeping your assets, keeping your territory, keeping your boundaries, making sure that nothing changes because you want to protect it. Whereas really in life, the only constant is change. And so what you need is a governance system that thrives on change. Every single aspect, from local to national to international, must welcome and embrace and thrive in change. And I know this is easy to say, but COVID has really helped us digest it in our cells, that change is the only constant. Now you take that core fundamental axiom and you try to apply it to governance. We should be running with nimble communities. We should have nimble councils that are experts and not voted in, right? But we should have, we in our hearts, not just like in our heads, like measurement systems. In our hearts, we need to embrace change and thrive in change. Now, why is it that China is able to do this? Because they had nothing. They had war, they had famine, they had a lot of death. So every day has been a better day. Every day, even though it's great change and sometimes a lot of dust, 10 years of dust of change, and new policies every day are very confusing, new platforms, new technologies, new words, new slogans. It's very confusing. It's very hard to keep track of, but maybe you don't need to keep track of it. Maybe you just thrive in the change and you see it as a benefit, because every single day in China since 2004, since I've been here, has been a better day. So when you go to China, you will see very hopeful people, even if COVID is here, even if you have pollution, even if you have construction, even if you have a bad day. Every day is a hopeful day. This is the biggest difference, right? So one is change is the only constant. The other one is if you cannot imagine it, you cannot build it. So my friends at the World Economic Forum in Africa that deal with Chinese state-owned enterprises to invest in Africa say the biggest difference between the West dealing with us and the Chinese dealing with us is they'll come to Africa and they'll see a great piece of land, barren piece of land, nothing there. And the Western people will come and say, oh, so far behind, so much work to do. Don't know if this will ever, become a modern developed society. Whereas the Chinese people will look at this barren piece of land and say, wow, this reminds me of Shenzhen just 30 years ago, just 50 years ago. It was a fishing village. Now Shenzhen is the capital, financial capital of China, the innovation capital of China for hardware, right? So Chinese people will come in and say, wow, we want to invest now. We want to build with you now because we know that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, this can be a Shenzhen of Africa, okay? So as you see, the imagination is there. So I'll give you a very simple example. Roger Bannister was the first person ever in the world to run a mile under 4 minutes. And before this, every single person said that this is physically, humanly impossible. 4 minutes is the barrier. And he's a neuroscientist. So somehow he trained himself and was able to break the 4-minute mile. And so what happened? Immediately after that, many people started to break the 4-minute mile. So you see, it's not that we have human physical barriers here in our cells, in our bones. We have barriers in our imagination. in our dream state, in our heart. And so my greatest lesson to you is that with this smart grid, we started with a white paper that drew a picture of what smart grid is. We said, here's how it's going to benefit China. With the eco cities, every single class we did 15-minute videos of any best practice, public square, public spaces, to low carbon transport, to eco-heritage tourism. I took best practices, I made a little 15-minute video out of it. I allowed them to imagine what could be in their town, in their city, because they don't travel. So they couldn't even imagine what Bryant Park looks like, what Kaikoura, New Zealand looks like, right? But with a short 15-minute video, I can stir their imagination. I can let them see that we can go to the moon. This is what JFK did. He let the Americans stir their imagination, right? So for every single one of these projects, I created a space, a safe space, to allow people to co-create, to curate their collective imagined reality. And we did it with such great detail, like James Cameron with the Avatar world in his movies, or George Lucas with Star Wars and that world, or Lewis Carroll with Alice in Wonderland. You imagine it in such great detail that when you describe it, people already feel like they're there, right? So if you can't talk about demand side management and what that does for you, what does that mean on a daily basis in the home and in the factories, then it can never be, because people don't know what they're building towards. This is the biggest problem with innovation, is how do you curate, co-create imagination of a reality that everybody is joyful about, that they're so joyful about it, they want to jump into it now, right? So if somebody here on the panel were to describe to me a beautiful Pakistan with the beautiful mountains, beautiful food, beautiful women and men, beautiful children, what does that life look like? And if you were able to get me, I've never been to Pakistan before, but wow, I'm like, oh, Athar, I need to get there now. Please get me on a plane. I want to be there now. Then everything else is easy, because 95% of what people do is subconscious, right? So you build this imagined reality into people's subconscious, and when they sleep, at every moment in the day, every single cell in their body is trying to make this a reality together. So the only job of an innovator, leader, is to create the safe space and to create the platform to make sure that every image is joyful, that it makes everybody joyful. So if there's an image that one person likes but everybody else doesn't like it, throw it away. That's what I did with China Dream. Every single workshop of 25 people, I designed it with advertising agencies. We went and did workshop after workshop after workshop with mayors to, Unilever people, to artists, to press people, to health people, to real estate people. They gave me the pictures. They gave me the words. And then I went back at night and I curated them. So obviously if somebody says, boy, it's really joyful for me to have a Hummer, big fossil fuel car, I'm going to go back at night and take that image out. Because I know that that's not going to be what most people are joyful about, right? So my biggest lesson to you is we're completely doing innovation wrong. It's not about a protocol, a network protocol. It's not about hardware. It's not about 3 scenarios for the future. It's not about anything with numbers. It's about the heart and the dream, the imagination. And that it's so simple. Children can do it. Actually, children can do it better than you can. Sorry. Children can do it better. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm working with Gen Z. It's called facebook.com/my.limitless.imagination. They are interviewing people and they're creating their collective reality, the world that they want to live in. And so once you imagine it, it can be. This is quantum physics. Once you observe it, it exists. We are all infinite potential reality. So now create kinetic reality by imagining it into being. Thank you.
Maggie, thank you very much. That's wonderful. And when COVID is over, we have to correct this mistake. We have to get you to that. I think you are such an sort of motivated, motivational speaker. I think you've made some wonderful points. I really appreciate what you've said. It's wonderful. But a couple of things that I'm a little confused about. I'll come to you about those, but let me bring in Professor Sharif. Professor Sharif, Peggy has said that the Chinese political system is far more capable of keeping up with the changing world, of how should I say, of innovating, of being capable of listening, of capable of changing with the world. We have been taught through school and many books, etc., that it is the American system of democracy or the open system that, as Asimoglu and Robinson, for example, write in My Nations Fail, that system is more amenable to change and bringing innovation. But Peggy Lewis turned that on its head. Would you agree with that, or how would you do that? Over to you, Mr. Sharif, Professor Sharif.
Thank you, Ms. Peggy Liu, as well, for your very inspirational talk. I mean, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and move from a practitioner's perspective to an analyst's perspective and discuss my analysis of China's innovation system. And to kick off, I'll address Professor Nadeem Huq's question directly, insofar as what kind of a system is the best system to promote innovation. And as Ms. Liu has mentioned, and as you have alluded to, Professor Huq, I think the Chinese have demonstrated beyond doubt that it is not just one kind of system that can succeed in terms of promoting innovation. So the American system, characterized by democracy, is characterized by the free market, where the government takes a backish seat and does not intervene directly. We've been taught as being a superior system. But funnily enough, if we look at not just China's innovation system, but many other countries' innovation systems as they have developed throughout history, including the German innovation system, the Swiss innovation system, the Japanese innovation system, not to mention even the American innovation system back during the period between World War I and up until just after the end of World War II, we find that government intervention is, funnily enough, extremely important and necessary for the development of an innovation system. Here, I'm not talking about an economic system. I would like to distinguish between an economic system and an innovation system. In order to promote innovation, the government needs to play a leading role. So I think what Ms. Liu has been saying is beyond doubt correct, insofar as what the Chinese have been doing by the government taking a leading role is not new. They are merely replicating what many other countries have done in the recent or not so recent past, including those countries that I just mentioned previously. So the American government today might tout the necessity of having a free and open market, but that is not to say that they have always been non-interventionist themselves. So I'd like to go back to the period of the Second World War, and during that period, the Americans themselves espoused an Hamiltonian philosophy, which said that in order to promote innovation in a country, the federal government must pair up or team up or cooperate with large enterprises in their country. And surely enough, the American government was a leading player in promoting innovation post-Second World War America, not least through military spending in R&D, but also through teaming up with large companies locally. So through that pairing, American companies were among the first to develop first-rate industrial in-house R&D labs. That is just one example that I allude to that goes to show the importance of the government taking a leading role. Now, with the Chinese, coming back to the China case, with the Chinese being an autocratic government, it continues to receive a lot of criticism for its heavy-handedness, for its secrecy, for its autocratic style of governance. But as far as innovation is concerned, that has worked perfectly. in the case of China. The government's leading role is one of three factors, I argue, that has allowed China to become such an active and leading innovation country in today's world. The fact that the government has been playing a leading role has distinguished it from other developing countries. Yes, you may argue that China is no longer a developing country today. It is already well developed, but China's efforts to innovate, led by a strong role played by the government, can be traced back as far back as the late 1990s at least. And so 25 years ago, when China started this process of trying to strengthen its innovation system, it was one of the few countries that was developing at that time in 1995, 1997, 1999, that made serious efforts to look towards a future and realize for itself, as Ms. Liu said, a future where they were not as dependent on population advantages as they have been over the last 4 decades. It was a future where they envisioned a leading and dominant role played by innovation. And sure enough, when we come to 2020, we see that innovation in China has taken off dramatically, both at the governmental level and also more importantly at the business level. And that has been a result of this concerted and continuous effort that the Chinese government have had to play over the last 3 decades. Now, I mentioned that there are 3 main factors that have led to China's ascent as a technological leader in the world today, one of which is a strong role played by the government. Let me just go and cover the other 2 factors that I think have played a leading role. The second factor is also quite obvious, is that China has the world's large domestic market. Now, this again is nothing new. Post Second World War, it was the United States of America that had the world's largest domestic market. So many companies around the world, including those in the United States, in Europe, took their innovations to the United States in order to commercialize them because of the presence of the large American domestic market. Now, today, China is replicating what advantage the Americans had 60, 70 years ago. So by having the world's largest domestic market, Chinese companies are in a position to be highly incentivized to try and innovate. The more they can sell the larger quantities of the products they can sell, the more likely they are going to be incentivized to make those products and services better. So that is a second factor that has contributed to China's success as a technological leader in the world today. And notice that when I talk about these 2 factors, a leading role played by the government and also a large domestic market, I've already said that these 2 factors are not factors that are unique to China, that are new to China. The United States of America, of all countries, enjoyed these 2 advantages, but only 70 years ago. Now, the third factor that has contributed to China's success as a leading innovation economy is something that is more unique to China, that the United States of America did not have an advantage of, and which may be coming which may be receding now in today's world, and that has been the importance and the effect of globalization. How has globalization positively impacted China's role to become a technological leader in the world today? It has done so because in order to acquire the latest scientific research, the latest technologies, the most expert human capital required to undertake the innovation efforts, China has realized over the last 2 decades that they need not do everything on their own. They can take advantage of globalization and simply go outside of their country and acquire or merge a company overseas with a local company. And with a lot of success, Chinese companies have been acquiring assets, companies overseas. Now, to be sure, many of these acquisitions are not technology related. For example, Dalian Wanda bought the AMC cinema chain in the United States, which is, not technologically oriented. But many of these acquisitions by Chinese companies outside of China have been with a view to obtaining the latest and the highest technology in the industry available anywhere in the world. So Chinese companies over the last 2 decades have become dominant foreign direct investors. So outward foreign direct investment from mainland China into the rest of the world has shot up from the mid 2004, 2005 onwards up until quite recently, 2018, 2019. And all of these efforts have been characterized quite heavily by the need to acquire technologies, scientific expertise that China domestically is weak in. So these 3 factors combined, a strong role played by the government, the presence of a large domestic market, and exploiting to their advantage the forces of globalization, have combined to propel China into a leading role insofar as being a technological leader in the globe today. So with those remarks, I'll leave it there and I'll hand over to the next speaker, because I think I've taken up my allotted 10 minutes. I have more to say, but I can come back to my remarks in the question and answer session.
Thank you, Professor Sharif. I think that's a very succinct sort of presentation, and you're absolutely right about the differences between China and the rest of the world. And yes, I buy your story on the role of the government. I think that it's an important story. The US role in government's role in science and technology has been documented by Mazakuto and many people, and it's an important story to bear in mind. But having said that, let me turn to Mr. Mansoor in your university. Mr. Mansoor, we have in Pakistan tried to give subsidies for R&D, tried to give licenses for innovation, tried to buy technology through foreign investments, such as cars, for example. We've given licenses for the last 70 years, protection for 70 years, but we see no change. So, Mansoor Sahab, you've been studying Chinese in policy too, and I think I'll bring Professor Sharif and Peggy back into this, but what is your story on this? Why are we failing? What can we learn from China?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nadeem. And I think in case of innovation, it is the productivity of innovation and the management of innovation that are of crucial importance, especially for developing countries like Pakistan, where resources for innovation are limited. In case of Pakistan, as you have pointed out rightly, that we have done, and we have used many policy instruments and we have used many policy tools, but we have not been able to get the results which we wanted to, especially in the civilian sector. If we see the Chinese story, and if we go through what China has been doing in terms of its journey towards innovation economy, because let me point it out here very clearly that China started its journey, its economic growth, as being an imitative economy. The initial period of China's economic growth was more based on imitation rather than innovation. It was only until, not until 2006 that officially Chinese government started to use innovation as part of its development strategy. And after 2006, they realized that it was really important for China to get out of middle income trap. And for getting out of that and lifting Chinese out of that middle income trap, it became extremely important to start working towards innovation, which economists call creative destruction. And it is an extremely important thing to adopt in your development strategy when you are moving towards a growth path. So I think it's, again, coming back to my first point, it is the management of innovation and the productivity of innovation, which needs to be taken into account. And in the case of China, I guess, and I believe very strongly that, as Professor Sharif has also pointed it out very clearly, that the role of government has been very strong and they have been able to get the results what they wanted. Secondly, I think there has been a lot of research as far as foreign direct investment in case of China, because China in the early part of 1990s was one of the largest recipients of FDI. And this FDI actually played a very significant role in promoting regional innovation capacity in case of China. And we see that the eastern part of China developed a lot in terms of its innovative capacity, and the innovation efficiency of the region was almost reached its peak during the early part of 2000, from 2000 to 2004. But I have to, caution the audience and the viewers on the role of FDI, which has been, in case of many countries, FDI has been high, but many countries and many examples, case studies show us that those countries have been unable to take the real benefit from FDI, which the FDI has the potential to bring for a particular country. In case of China, two things actually played important role, and which a country like Pakistan can also take into account when they are entering into a kind of a collaboration, which Pakistan is entering with China in case of CPEC and in case of the special economic zones which are being rolled out, and the first has been rolled out recently. So if Chinese foreign direct investment starts coming in industrial sector and in different sectors of the economy, then I think two things which we can learn from China very categorically is that we have to improve our absorptive capacity. And by absorptive capacity, I mean that first I would point out that for significant spillovers from any FDI, the absorptive capacity of local firms and organizations need to be very high. And secondly, there should be sufficient effective linkages between foreign and domestic economic activities. So if Pakistan wants to really follow that path of industrialization and technological upgradation and catch up, it needs to understand that in the case of a deeper collaboration with industrial cooperation, which is one of the major components and pillars of CPEC, which is a flagship project of the Belt and Road Initiative, Pakistan needs to enhance its absorptive capacity. Absorptive capacity of a region or a country is actually proxied by the technology gap, which exists between the foreign and the domestic firms, and also the R&D intensities of the local firms or human capital embodied in local firms. So in case of Pakistan, we see that Pakistan's workforce as well as industry, it lacks the necessary absorptive capacity to benefit from any FDI. So even if the government uses those policy tools or policy instruments, and the government has been, using them over many years, but the results have not been, the outcomes have not been so positive for the country. Secondly, I think another thing which China managed I think in a very professional manner was besides building absorptive capacities of the local firms and industry, was building up of complementary assets, which in case of Pakistan, we also see that there is lack of any focus as far as complementary assets and building those complementary assets are concerned. Complementary assets is a very, it's a very widely used terminology. And if I just dissect this term in front of the audience, I would say that it is basically 2 or 3 indicators, which if present in an economy, along with absorptive capacity, can help you tread that path of technological upgradation and can help you move up the value chain. For example, in complementary assets, we usually measure the number of computers per 1,000 household. We see the share of value added from high-tech industry and regional total value added products. And we also see the transaction value in technological markets, which measures the extensiveness and depth of technology linkages, flows and transactions in the regions, and reflects the development level of the institutions. And finally, I think besides these absorptive capacity and complementary assets, it is the usually in the research on innovation, we have those input side, the input side where we say that R&D expenditure needs to be increased. But as I've pointed out in my initial argument, that it is not the enhancement or increasing of R&D, it is the management of that innovation or productivity of innovation that needs to be taken into account if you really want to benefit from any innovative, from any innovation, or you want to take your economy towards that innovative path. So in China's case, the input side also includes not just increasing the R&D, because the Chinese strategic document of 2006 when the Chinese R&D was not as high as it is today. The latest World Bank figures put the Chinese R&D as of 2018 to 2.2% of their GDP, but they are targeting to bring it to 2.5, and they are almost touching it. So it's one of the, it's a little bit, on the higher side if we compare it with similar developing economies of the world. So it's not just the R&D. It was another factor, which was the development of the linkages between academia and firms, and developing the required skills of the labor force when China was transitioning from imitation to an innovation economy. So I think these things, the Pakistani government definitely doesn't have those resources, but to start with, I think to pick up the thread, it would be advisable that the government should first start prioritizing and putting focus and emphasis on technology, science, and innovation as one of the main pillars for economic growth, long-term, medium-term, and long-term economic growth, just as China did. And maybe to start with, when we start the, we start moving towards some kind of, completion of these industrial component of China-Pakistan economic corridor, we can learn from Chinese practices, their processes, their production methods, and then those joint ventures or other, kind of collaborative approaches which both governments can mutually decide. They can help Pakistan build absorptive capacity as well as complementary assets, besides the other inputs which are needed for taking Pakistan towards that innovation path. So I leave it there, and I can take any comments and questions in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll inshallah come to that. I think this is an opportune time to turn to Dr. Osama. Athar, I think this is the right time for you to sum up. You've been in the government, you've been a member of the Planning Commission, in particular for innovation, and you have taken an innovation initiative with HEC, and you've set up this innovation foundation. So I think it's important for you to address this issue. Now, Athar has talked about absorptive capacity. Would you say we have the absorptive capacity in Pakistan? Peggy before mentioned that she ran seminars for mayors and senior officials, and they attended and participated and learnt. We have tried, we can't get senior officials to come and listen to us. So is that our failing, or is that the failing of the system here? How do we establish that? Peggy says we should imagine a new future and show it to them. But as that famous movie said, if you build it, they will come. But unfortunately, here we build it and they don't come. So Athar, over to you.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Nadeemul Haq. So I mean, in this process, I think we are all here to learn. I would just share a few things that I feel I need to add into this mix regarding China and regarding Pakistan. But I'm equally as much ears with what my other three panelists have to say about China, because they are more experts in in the Chinese system than I am. I feel to some extent there are some fundamental issues with the way Pakistan has approached innovation, science, or technology that I feel are problems or gaps in our ability to actually translate some of what happens right in Pakistan into commercial exploitation or sort of impact on the ground. I used to say that there's some place where I've sort of written that there is this triangle of how a country, a nation spends on science, technology, innovation, where for the public sector, there is basic research at the at the bottom, applied research next, innovation and entrepreneurship on the top. The public sector spends majority of its money on basic research, a little less on applied research, and sort of much less on innovation and entrepreneurship. In a developed economy, there is an inverted triangle, which is basically how the private sector spends its money. And the private sector spends very little on basic research, a little bit more on applied research, and a significant amount of money on commercialization and translation and these kinds of activities. In our country, unfortunately, most of the money that goes towards science and technology and innovation actually spent by the public sector. So we have one part of the triangle probably right. What we don't have is the other part of the triangle, which is missing. With the result that no matter what the government spends on science and technology, it is unable to actually translate it into any kind of commercial returns and outcomes. And we are aware of this. When you talk to actually some public sector labs, even universities across the country, you find that people have done some interesting stuff. It just hasn't made it out towards commercial return, because it usually takes 10 times more resources that goes into the R&D part to actually take it out and make it commercial. So I think one of the big failings of the Pakistani system is the absence of business or private sector spending on S&T and innovation, which is actually the part that even makes the public investment go commercial or be translated into returns. So I think that's one part. The other, I think, also generally, I think to some extent our society somehow lacks the ability or the institutions to support individuals who are trying to go against the grain of the society and do something innovative. I think this, that's a general thing. I don't want to go beyond a certain, generalization on this, but, my earliest, recollection of what I mean comes from about 1986 or so, when I was living in Karachi, and there was this guy who had actually developed a twin-engine aircraft from a Suzuki Jeep. He was an engineer and a pilot in PIA. He said that he's developed this, twin-seater aircraft out of a Suzuki Jeep, and he said that the total cost of this aircraft is about 2 lakh rupees at the time. At the time, a Suzuki Jeep was probably worth, 1 lakh rupees. He flew that aircraft in the skies. He was covered by the television. We all sort of clapped and hailed him as a hero. Several years later, and he was of the view that if somehow I can find somebody, some investment, from the government, some kind of support from the government or anybody in the country, I could create a twin-seater, aircraft industry in Pakistan. Along after that, his aircraft model was placed in PIA Planetarium. I went there and sat there. I was inspired. I became an aeronautical engineer, by looking at his example. But 10-15 years down the lane, I went to the US, came back, and I was I tried to find this person, as to what happened. And there's no sort of track of that person at all. So I was on a television show 6-7 years ago, and I related this story, and the compere there made a comment. He said that probably the difference between him and the Wright brothers was that he was born in the wrong country. And this is exactly what happened. With the Wright brothers, they created an aircraft, and they got a contract from the US Army to build X number of aircraft, and the rest is history. We have airplanes because of their effort. And this poor chap did not get anything, and his invention sort of went to waste. So I think this is another very significant barrier in our society, in our culture. I don't know, somehow I'm not a sociologist to be able to, exactly pin down, what is wrong here. But I feel that as a society and a culture, we don't support people who go against the grain and do innovative things. And I think that is also something that we need to do. And so one of the motivations for me creating the Pakistan Innovation Foundation was that, I wanted to do this generational quest to create a society that rewards the innovators. Now, I don't know how much successful I have been, in that, but we have inspired some people to do some interesting things. I feel that as a whole, our problem is to take from, I think, what Peggy said, it's been a it's been a failure of imagination, but also a failure of implementation. Oftentimes you feel and you see that whenever resources have been provided to a set of people, a mandate has been given to them, and there has been a good way to sort of monitor progress, they have delivered. So, whether you look at the agriculture revolution in the 60s, or you look at our nuclear program or the missile program or whatever, these were instances where people were given a responsibility and they were able to deliver. But apart from these examples, we have sort of failed to implement. We have even failed to imitate. As I think one of the things that pointed out by the other panelists is that one of the more interesting thing about China is this transition from an imitation economy to an innovation economy, and I think we need to really understand how this transition has happened. But in order to try to replicate some of these lessons, we will have to first become an imitation economy, and we aren't even sort of really good at it. So I think that is really important. I often say that we need to understand China, because China is very, very different from the US, for instance. I started going to China about 5-6 years ago when I became the fellow of the World Economic Forum, and we have this annual meeting there in the in the summer, where I take an opportunity to sort of go and spend a couple of weeks in China, and try to just experience that creative energy, that imagination, that entrepreneurship that you see is China, that you see in China is totally unlike anything that you see in the West. We usually sort of benchmark innovation and creativity and entrepreneurship with the West, and we see, okay, if the US or the Silicon Valley is at 100, maybe sort of Boston is at 85, and the UK is at 70, and sort of Germany is at 80, because we are trying to create sort of in our mind imagine replicas of the Western model of innovation and entrepreneurship. But what you see in China is totally unlike and unreal in terms of what you see in the West. And so I actually feel that we need to have a lot more interaction with China, not just because I think China is the next emerging superpower in the area of science and technology and economics, but also that we are in this relationship with China through the CPEC, that we are in this marriage where we don't know our partner really well. There aren't enough business-to-business contacts. There isn't enough understanding of how China works, how China operates, and we feel that if we don't do that, in the near future, maybe we'll not be able to sort of capitalize on on this relationship, but also we might actually be be on a disadvantage. So just a couple of other things in terms of trying to understand how China operates. I think it's really important to understand how government direction and directive translates into and sort of connects with the entrepreneurial energy in China. I think that's a piece that I think we need to really understand, not just because we are interacting with China and intend to sort of benefit from that relationship, but also because I think for our own sake we need to understand that. I also feel that there is huge opportunity, for example, in this case, in the case of this 5G business for countries like Pakistan, which have traditionally had a very strong software sector as against hardware sector, and China has not had that strong a software sector. So I think there could be a very important partnership here. There is also potentially an important partnership, now that China has talked about sort of building its own chips and all this backlash because of the Western response to 5G. I think there's a natural partnership here for Pakistani companies to work with China and start working on some of the hardware and embedded systems areas as well. But I do feel at the end that the more Pakistani businessmen and entrepreneurs interact with Chinese businessmen and entrepreneurs, not just the government people. I think that the government people interact quite a lot, But the more business to business contacts happen and the more personal to personal contacts happen, the better we'll be able to understand the Chinese innovation and ecosystem, and better we'll be able to do going forward. And I absolutely do feel that for us, looking towards the east is probably the way to go.
Thank you, Athar. Thank you. Let me bring in a few questions from the floor. Taimur Khalid.
Assalam.
Go ahead.
One Athar has actually Athar Usama, the speaker that was recently came up with some of the truths in our society, some kind of things that we are not embarrassing the innovations and we are not promoting our talents. And the other one, the person, Athar before that, I don't know his full name, but he was saying that we should provide innovations and we should promote innovations. So basically, my question is that how the government will play its role, whether the government should embrace it or whether it should promote it or whether it provides the opportunities. How will that happen? Is there, because I belong to a software sector, and in the software area we are all the software industry in Pakistan is approximately earning $100 billion a year. But in India, as we can see in other parts of the other countries around the world, they are accumulating much more money from this. So in the industry of software, how should we bring these innovations come up to the mark and up to the that will bring changes to the software industry?
Right. Thank you. Muhammad Khalid Khan. Khalid Khan. I think Khalid has lost his mic or something. Okay, fair enough. No problem. Okay. Anybody? Khalid Khan, are you speaking or not? Yeah, sorry. I don't think Khalid can get. Okay.
Khalid mic is on mute. Kindly, Khalid, ask your question.
Khalid, have you unmuted your mic or not? Okay, no. So fine, we'll do that. Okay, fair enough. Let me raise a few questions then before I turn back to the panel. One is, Professor Sharif, I think we tend to romanticize, and all of you in fact, we tend to romanticize innovation as being something in the high-tech sector. And we tend to look upon our people in a sense as not innovative. I would like to argue that our people are quite innovative at the bottom of the pyramid because they have to survive. I noticed that these people who have to survive, the poor, they are very innovative, especially when it comes to migrating to other countries by hook or by crook, legally or illegally, and then making an entrepreneurial life for themselves, either by singing that famous song, 1 Pound Fish, or doing something else. So that's also entrepreneurship, that's also innovation. At the same time, these people do create innovation in their own spheres. Even, for example, if it's setting up a tea stall or something. And I would argue here, Starbucks is a very important corporation that has now worth about 18 or $20 billion. So yes, innovation can also lie in this sector. So the question is, Professor Sharif, you argued the government is important for innovation, its role. But I think the government is also very important for its role in blocking innovation. And is it possible that while the government of China is fostering innovation, the government of Pakistan in many poor countries, not just Pakistan, I've lived in Nigeria, I've lived in East Africa, the governments do actually preclude innovation. For example, Peggy just mentioned overseas acquisition. Our country actually bans the overseas acquisition by any organization. There's a famous case of one of the richest men in Pakistan who went and bought a hotel in London. I must say I more or less teased him into doing that. But the problem is now he's facing an inquiry and he is being charged with all kinds of crimes. So innovation is not necessarily just fostered by the government. The government can also preclude innovation. Another innovation I'll give you, for example, we have a very healthy, innovative sector in the food industry and in the fashion industry. But our fashion industry finds it very difficult to go outside the country and gain the market. So there is a problem there too. So with that, can you just please give us your thoughts on this?
Sure, sure. So the first point I'd like to
Go
make
ahead,
is
Mr.
I completely agree with you that we have a tendency to romanticize innovation. Innovation does not need to be high tech. Innovation can be at the bottom of the pyramid. And I would argue that two of the speakers, the two authors who talked about imitation, I would argue that that too is innovation. If you can imitate well, that is an innovation for you. Imitation is, when I describe what innovation is, if someone asks me what is innovation, it's very simple. Innovation is simply doing something new. If you can find a quicker way to get from the classroom to the toilet, you have done something new. That too is an innovation. It does not need to be high tech. So I agree with you, first of all, on that point. We have a tendency to romanticize innovation. Innovation, we have to take off these blinkers from our head to understand that innovation can be something relatively simple from other people's perspective, but yet it ought to be categorized nevertheless as an innovation, particularly when we're talking about third world countries. What we categorize as innovation in a third world country may not be, obviously will not be considered an innovation in China, in the US, and Japan, and so forth. But that is not to take anything away from the innovative efforts of those in the third world countries who are doing it new, who are doing something new for the first time. So that I completely agree with you. And then was your second point about the government's role in terms of blocking versus promoting innovation. So I would say that the government has a strong role to play. In terms of a positive role, I think the governments have a role to play in creating the systems and institutions. As you mentioned, we have a lot of innovative people in Pakistan. We have a lot of people who are very resourceful. Your speaker last week, Mr. Ernesto Ciroli, talked about how people in third world countries are so innovative. They would wrap you up in an envelope and throw you away for Westerners because the Westerners just can't understand them. In those cases, I feel it is imperative upon those governments in those third world countries to create the systems and institutions that will allow their individuals, the citizens, to flourish. So why is it that a Pakistani who is perhaps even trained in Pakistan can go to America and become a first-rate neurosurgeon, but yet unable to achieve any similar sorts of success in Pakistan itself? I would argue because of the lack of systems, institutions, the reward mechanisms, and so forth. So when we're talking about innovation, I think we also have to move away from this fallacy that the government must target innovation per se. No, by promoting education, by enforcing the rule of law, by protecting intellectual property, you are also creating a conducive environment for innovation, even though education per se may not be directly related to innovation. Now, the second point that you made about some governments, and you mentioned the example being blockers of innovation, now that I think is very unfortunate, because the very simple way of conceptualizing it for me is a motor vehicle. In a motor vehicle, you can have a drive gear, which makes the car go forward, and you can have a reverse gear that makes the car go backward. Now, in the case of blocking innovation, you were talking about how some countries, and the example that you gave was Pakistan's example of where they try to ensnare people who are being innovative, who are trying to break the boundaries. Now, in those cases, I think it is extremely unfortunate. And going back to the car analogy, it would be much better if those countries simply kept the car in neutral. Don't do anything. Don't do anything. Leave the people to do what they want. Unless they're engaging in criminal activities, harming other people, you stop them from doing that. But otherwise, let them flourish. If you are not able to positively impact the systems and institutions, don't negatively impact them. That's what I would say.
Great. Peggy, can I turn to you? I mean, you mentioned, and very rightly so, that the Chinese government is able to create a society where change is a constant and where people can move dynamically. And most important of all, which actually puzzles me, which puzzles a lot of people, Chinese state enterprises are very innovative, very creative. How is that possible? Our state enterprises, Peggy, are losing 1.5 trillion rupees a year. Our state enterprises are a disaster in terms of their financial management and in terms of their asset management. Now, you said that they are able to do that and they are able to even manage their assets well. Peggy, can you explain that? Is it because the Chinese have been able to create markets for those systems? What is the governance mechanism for these state enterprises? Peggy, I think you have to unmute.
I just gave you a whole speech in 1 minute and on mute. Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret, which very few people in the world or even within China know. The secret to China's harmonious progress, because this is tremendous change, and change people don't like. Human beings don't like change. So how is it that China not only created change, but did it in a harmonious, happy way? The secret is its mandatory government training system. There's only one country in the world that I know that does this, and that's Singapore. So if you are a government official, you must take 12 days of minimum training each year. More if you have a big promotion. And if you're a special person that they like, they're saying this person has a lot of potential, maybe they send you to Harvard for a year, Kennedy School, okay? Because Chinese people love education. So that's a reward for you to go to Harvard Kennedy School for a year. So the reason why I know this is because I probably am the only person outside of the Chinese government that has been invited to be a professor at these government academies. There are 8 of them. These all have branches. The first one that was created was the National Academy for Mayors of China in 1988. This was the one that the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development asked me to teach the first classes of how to build eco-cities. So I started the first class, which is called What is an Eco-City there. This is in Beijing. And then I did such a great job, according to them, that I was introduced to CLAP, the China Executive Leadership Academy of Pudong. Pudong is in Shanghai. This is the newest campus, and a famous architectural competition occurred, and a famous French architect built a beautiful, beautiful campus for the government officials to come and spend, you know, up to a month or 3 months there. Dormitories, Olympic level pools, Olympic level badminton courts, many of them, beautiful gardens. They even have a separate Muslim cafeteria. And then we did such a good job teaching there that we were invited to speak at the China Academy of Governance, where I was appointed a distinguished professor. The China Academy of Governance is the #1 academy of government officials across the country. And they recently merged with the party school. There's 2 branches of systems, the party and the government. And so now it's the one academy that teaches both. Imagine the tremendous power if you have 50 mayors in a classroom for a month or 12 days, right? The longest class that I've taught was 10 days, almost killed me. I was like, whoa, that's too long. I can't be a professor for that long. That's what I learned. But so 10 days, imagine if you have these people, they're in a classroom and you can dream of anything. You can teach them anything. Of course, you know, you have to work with the curriculum director and you have to approve the curriculum, but I can bring any best practice I want into this classroom and show them the wonders of the world. And then all they want to know is, who do I call so I can implement this tomorrow? It's a wonderful, wonderful mechanism. And even other countries' governments are invited to come. So I've personally seen Middle Eastern governments, Australian governments, many governments come there, African nations, to come there for, again, a couple weeks at a time to learn the China model. So one, I will tell you that education is the key to China's future. And there's many, many different Look at squirrel.ai. Squirrel, you know, the animal, squirrel.ai. It's, they turned the Gaokao, college entrance exam materials, into AI technology. So now even in rural areas, they're replacing the teacher's function with these PCs where the kid can learn on its own pace because the AI knows what it needs to learn and what it already knows. So it can personalize education. So now whole rural schools are being built in conjunction with Squirrel AI, where the teacher becomes the monitor and the student just learns at its own pace, or his or her own pace. So another, you know, again, collaborative education is very important for China. So look up Helen Hai, H-A-I, World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, friend of mine in Shanghai. She created something called Made in Africa. She was invited by the president of Ethiopia when she was on tour with the CEO of a shoe factory, a friend of hers, to come and build a shoe factory in Ethiopia. So she decided to say yes, leave her very well-to-do financial job, investment banking job in London, to go to Ethiopia. And within 2 years, she hired 3,000 people. And she brought in retired factory managers from China to teach them the China factory model, and built with the president of Ethiopia ultimately a light manufacturing economic zone. She did such a good job that 8 heads of state then asked her to do the same thing. This is now a UN, I believe UNDP possibly, initiative called Made in Africa. So I highly recommend you look this up. She's very low profile, so you will not hear about this in the news. I believe she deserves like a Nobel Peace Prize. So why not approach China collaboratively? You know, this is the West's failing with China, that they don't approach China collaboratively, but rather they look at it as a competitor. But there's many things that we can mutually benefit by working together, hence the Belt and Road project, right? So the secret that I'm going to tell you is that we need to create a safe space for people to imagine together, right? So the imagination, the collective reality, for the Chinese government, it is this academy system, right? It's a beautiful, literally beautiful space, right? You literally got Olympic-sized pools and many, many Olympic-sized badminton, ping pong tables, right? Amazing food. So this is a safe space to learn. So how can we create a safe space for children? So that I put in a website, facebook.com, my.limitless.imagination, where Gen Z can put in what is the world that they want to live in, right? We need to create safe spaces to dream together, right? This is called education. Teach, learn, learn, teach. Teach, learn, learn, teach, right? So I would say collaborate with China, do not find it a competitor, because China believes that if its neighbors are prosperous, then it's mutually beneficial, right? Actually, we must have mutually prosperous neighbors. This is the fundamental premise behind Belt and Road. Right? So I'll stop there. And if you have any further questions, feel free to ask.
The two Athars. Let's turn to Athar Mansoor. Athar, Peggy says, create a safe space. Peggy says, do education. We all agree. And we have safe spaces, Peggy, Athar, we have lovely institutes that could even beat China's institutes in terms of physical infrastructure. Got great infrastructure, got lovely hotels, got lovely places to stay in. And I have in China, Dalian, so I know some of the spaces they've created, we've got equal spaces. What is it, Athar? Why can't we get our innovation policy right? We've got these safe spaces, we have bureaucrats who get training, yet somehow, I think that something happens when we come together. We can't create innovation. And we can't even get, what Peggy gets is they actually come and listen. These guys don't listen. I teach at our institutes all the time. I teach every month almost. They don't listen. What do we do, Athar?
Yeah.
Do Athars, both of you.
Okay. You want me to take first?
Go ahead, Athar. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think, to be very honest, I'm also the part of public sector for the last, I think, 22 years. And I started my public service in 1998. And since then, I realized that it's the, if I apply the rational choice theory on, public sector employees in Pakistan, they're always looking for, oversupplying and, maximizing their budgets and things like that, and not listening to professional. It's like, it's a culture which gets inculcated, it gets developed in you as a bureaucrat, as a civil servant, as a functionary of the state, where you are, a design, you get design, your thinking gets designed in a very, I would say, technologically or new idea aversion manner. You don't, take ideas very openly. You keep yourself closed to any new thinking, any new point of view, any new opinion, any new suggestion. And that creates a lot of, and that has a lot of spillover. So a lot of people, as you have pointed out, have been trained at maybe Chicago, at Harvard, at MIT, at Stanford. They have come back, they are in public service, they are working for government, but their whatever time they have spent, I just, whenever I talk to them, I converse with them, I tell them that it was just a vacation for you. You went there, you spent your time, you got a scholarship, you were, you spent good time in the US or UK or wherever. And now when you have come back, you are going to, get into that mode again, where you're going to thwart things, where you're going to close yourself to any new suggestions. And that's what happens very quickly. And secondly, I think that the development of technological capabilities is the outcome of, I would say, of a complex of interaction of incentive structures. For example, with human resources, with institutional factors. And these incentive structures, they also include macroeconomic incentives. Incentives from competition and factor markets. And institutions include market and non-market institutions, such as the legal framework in the country. Then industrial institutions and training and technology institutions, they have to come together and create a synergistic effort. They have to come together, they have to get into that coordination mode, which unfortunately, as you have pointed out, and I must concede and I must confess that as part of a state machinery, we are not, even if we get those trainings where we get promoted, because those mandatory trainings are required to get promotion, and we listen to, experts, just experts are invited, but we are like, we keep ourselves closed, and we don't, try to buy the argument or whatever they are saying, and try to even analyze critically what they are saying about, these innovation or technological capabilities or new ideas, as the other panelists have pointed out. So it is what we are lacking, I think, is the understanding of the interplay of these factors which I've pointed out, which are required for upgrading the technological capabilities of our country, because this complex interaction has to be coordinated. And that coordination is the capacity to coordinate. And I have pointed out earlier also that lack of absorptive capacity is part of it. Because when you are unable to coordinate this complex interaction of various forces, which are required for you to move from basic science to maybe, the basic science is maybe ambit of research institutions, and we have world-class institutions here, but maybe, going into applied science, or then into, experimental development. So that is lacking, and that is the real tragedy for this nation, that people are still unable to realize that the world is growing so fast, and science, technology, innovation needs to play an important role in any country's long-term sustainable development. And all these courses, these trainings, I would very candidly also point out that up until recently, there is a School of Public Policy in Singapore known as Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. It used to give scholarships, a lot of generous scholarships to Pakistani students. And I was the part of their, their alumni chapter in Pakistan. I was one of the office bearers. And they rolled back a program which had collaboration with Harvard Kennedy School and a lot of civil servants from various service groups, occupational groups in civil service of Pakistan had gone and joined that program. And one of the faculty members from that school has also moved to Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And I was conversing with him that what is the reason that you have reduced the number of scholarships for Pakistani students and you have increased it for Indian students or other South Asian economies. And his answer was that, you know, basically it's that we are unable to trace any outcomes for these civil servants who come and join these expensive programs and are unable to give back to the country, because when we recruited them or when we gave them the admission, it was our ultimate goal or eventual, you know, we were targeting that they would go back and become change agents within a society which is marred by a lot of inertia, a lot of status quo. I think that is my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I interrupt and just say one thing? When I say safe space, I don't mean like physical space. I mean like emotional space, right? So think about your indigenous elders, the shamans, the healers, the grandmothers, the grandfathers, right? The elders that make you feel safe to dream, right? So one of the biggest lessons that I've learned that I'm now teaching people as of this fall is, you know, remember, I'm an MIT engineer. I studied engineering, electrical engineering, computer science. So I come from this technical, analytical world. I'm a poster child for McKinsey. So analysis is my backyard, right? However, the most important thing that I've learned is that you don't need to know how you're going to get to there. You don't need to know how. You don't need to analyze how. The most important thing to understand is that the world that you create is where you focus your attention. The more you focus your attention on what is wrong with the world, the more you emphasize and give energy to that world. This is the most important lesson that I can share. Only focus your entire attention, your entire being, on the world you want, on the world that you want. Because this is energy. Energy is an investment. And we are changing potential energy into kinetic energy. Right? I'm speaking a little bit from my Qigong practice, ancient Chinese wisdom here. But think about anything that you do. If you spend 90% of your time talking about what are the barriers, you are strengthening those barriers. If you spend 90% of your time talking today about what is the beautiful Pakistan that you want to live in, then we could have been halfway there already today in 2 hours. I lead 3-hour workshops. I lead 3-hour workshops where we can imagine together the world that you want. We just spent 1.5 hours talking about everything that is wrong. We didn't really talk about what is it that you want to accomplish? What is the world that you want to live in? What are the communities look like? I went to Parsons fashion school and design school in New York. And there is a professor who's Pakistani. His family comes from textile industry. And he teaches innovation in the fashion industry. And he very proudly introduced to me a girl that he handpicked from a rural area in Pakistan. That's the first, I forget the terminology, but first special fellow or something like that, who got full scholarship to come to Parsons, which is probably one of the top design schools in the world. And she showed me her fashion designs. She showed me her portfolio. She's a genius. She's a very young girl, genius, right? So, but if nobody sees that a girl from, you know, farmland, rural farmland from Pakistan can be at the top school in New York City with full scholarship, they'll never think that's a possibility. Instead, if you talk about how there's a barrier of this, there's a barrier of money, we're from the wrong country, she's a girl, she's not a boy, you don't take a single step forward. So I encourage you to completely throw everything that you've learned out the door. And I went to MIT. I went to Harvard Kennedy School. I went to Lee Kuan Yew Singapore School, public policy. I have all these degrees. I threw everything out, because I know that if I can draw it, I can imagine it to the point where Avatar is that beautiful, that, real, where you want to jump into that world and only live in it. That's when you succeed. And in fact, it will succeed immediately. So I urge you, stop talking about what's wrong. Stop analyzing. Stop scenarioizing. Just draw out what is the future of Pakistan that you want. The difference between the Wright brothers and that other guy that you were talking about is that the Wright brothers sold a vision of the future. This other guy is selling technology specs. Okay, so go and bring in the, graphic designers, the people who can draw, the people who can imagine, the storytellers, the singers. Bring them to, PIDE with you. Bring in the children, bring in the elderly, the grandmothers, the mothers, and ask them what is the world that you want. Ask them to draw that. Everything else is a waste of time. I am one person who proves that this formula works. The China Dream is simply a bunch of people coming together with pictures and words that are emotional and not intellectual. I know this is probably very difficult for you to hear because this is an analytical think tank. But I'm from your world. And this world doesn't work in terms of changing society. To build society, you need to build from the heart and not the head. The heart and not the head. So when I created the China Dream, I went and threw away every word that was intellectual. Sustainable, eco, green, PM 2.5, scenario, analysis, all of that stuff I threw away. Instead, we were left with a collective journey that we're on together, moving from survivability to livability to thrivability. These are emotional words that everybody has a heart. Not everybody has an MIT degree, but everybody has a heart. So tap into that heart. The world that you create is the world that you put energy in, that you focus on. Energy is investment. So I'll leave you there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Athar, to bring you in. Wrap it up. Tell us how you can dream the world that Peggy is talking about in your Innovation Foundation and how we can achieve that.
Yeah, so basically Peggy has just proven that all of us have been wasting all our lives trying to do something that will not happen the way we want to do it. No, so I think this is great. And, I do, agree with Peggy that there is this other part of the story that probably, we are missing. And that's the whole purpose of these, sessions. Nadeem, when you and I were talking about these, I told you I don't want these, I don't want these to sort of become an exercises to sort of, talk negatively about Pakistan, which is why I think the more we can get hold of new ideas like how Peggy has described today, the better it is. But I would just sort of say a couple of things. I think it is really important for us to recognize that merit should be the only way forward. Unless we are committed to creating meritorious societies, and again, I don't mean it in a sort of social progression kind of way, but I mean it in a way that people who work hard and who deliver should be given opportunities to do that. Also, I think for some reason we as people do not believe in people. Pakistan is now, I think, the sixth or the fifth most populous country in the world. People should be our be something that we should be able to sort of build upon, but the same human capital kind of sort of becomes a problem, a challenge for us. I think we need to find people, we need to reward people, we need to identify people who are willing to sort of go beyond the call of duty and invest in them and give them opportunity and reward them and recognize them. For some reason, we are sort of stuck in this scarcity mindset where if somebody else does something good, he kind of takes he or she kind of takes away from us, instead of an abundance mindset where if somebody else does something, we all benefit from it, right? So I think we need to sort of get away from some of these inherent problems, sociological problems in our society. Government obviously has a role to play, but I do believe that government, as long as it sort of provides the basic framework for innovation, should sort of stay out of the business basically, and sort of let people flourish and let people take the initiative and take this forward. And I think the way sort of Peggy describes this, I think it's worth exploring how we can take some of these ideas forward. By the way, Peggy, when we started Pakistan Innovation Foundation, the first challenge that we ran was a challenge for designers to envision Pakistan of 2050. That was the approach that we took. And I think we found some challenges even in doing that kind of thing, but I think that's something we can probably discuss more with Peggy and try to get her help to approach in a more systematic way.
Arthur, can I offer something, a gift?
Yes.
If you can organize a Zoom meeting for 3 hours, I will have my team lead you and your children and your wives together in a workshop.
Wonderful.
To imagine the Pakistan you want. 3 hours Zoom. I will have my team lead you through some questions. All they have to do is bring some pictures of the Pakistan community that they would like to live in. That's all they have to do. And some pictures of their childhood memories that make them joyful. And then they will ask you questions and then give you time. And then ask you a question, give you some time. And we'll have a platform that you can put this on. It's very simple.
We'll do that. Arthur, we're going to do that.
To you.
Great. Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. Folks, thank you very much. This was the whole point of doing these webinars, and Arthur and I will do many more. The reason being that this is the quest of human endeavor, a quest of learning. We will never be able to understand the human psyche or how humanity works, but we will all try and work together, as Peggy says, to find a safe space, to change, to develop ourselves, to move forward. And we will learn from China, the US, wherever we can. We will learn from history to move forward. And the only way to do it is, as Peggy says, to do it collectively, imagine a new world and learn from others, learn from each other. So I thank all of you, the two authors, Nawbahar Sharif Saab and Peggy Liu. You have all made my life richer, the evening better for me. And I'm sure for the 100 people here and the 1,000 people on Facebook, lots of people who have learned from you. So thank you very much. And Peggy, your kind offer, we will definitely take you up. As COVID improves, we will get all of you to visit Pakistan and see for yourself that we've got some good things happening in Pakistan. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for giving us your time. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.